We have the first quarter financial results for Hasbro in 2018. And a lot of negative stuff here, essentially. It was not a good first quarter for 2018 for Hasbro. Now, Brian Goldner, the CEO of Hasbro, attributes most of that to the recent news that we've been talking about all of February forward in 2018 of Toys R Us going under in the United States and in the UK. And
Yeah.
that affected a lot of things for that first quarter. Essentially, that the second they announced they were going bankrupt, all orders and sales just went to a halt from one company that was a guaranteed sales division,
Yeah.
and everything from franchise brands went down 19%. Partner brands are brands that are related to stuff that they don't personally own, but they do the toys for, like Star Wars, like let's say the Marvel stuff.
Hmm.
Their gaming brand went down 22%. That one I found interesting because um, I understand that Toys R Us, from the Hasbro gaming standpoint, Toys R Us has a huge board game section.
Hmm.
But I didn't realize, I guess, how important Toys R Us was for board games. I've never
Or
noticed.
those like iconic board games, pretty
Well, it's
much,
just
I would
because,
say.
and when I saw that part, I was like, when I go into Walmart, how much of space is allocated to board games in Walmart? And I honestly thought to myself, I'm like, honestly, I don't even know where the board game section is in Walmart in the toy section. Like, I don't even.
They're
They're
around. I've
probably
seen them.
there, but they're just not as, I guess, big. You know what I mean? It's just not a big section. And when I think about that, when I go to Toys R Us, I know exactly where the board game section is because that is a massive section.
Hmm.
So obviously, Toys R Us closing hurts their board game brand heavily. Hasbro Gaming also includes Magic the Gathering, but
Hmm.
Magic probably is trucking along as normal. It's more the board games that are making that huge 22% downsize. And then their emerging brands, which are all their new brands from 2018, also was down 6%. So everything was down. Uh, the essential final numbers was they had a $112.5 million loss just
Mm.
in the first quarter, which is really bad. Now, of course, they're going into it with their explanations. Like I said, Toys R Us was a primary reason for all that stuff going down, but them essentially saying overall they feel that going into the second quarter and third quarter with plans from international stuff and how things are going to be changing, combined with, and this is to quote Brian here, the Transformers Bumblebee movie, our first film under our new agreement with Paramount Picture Productions and
Yeah.
distributors, will hit theaters this December and mark an important evolution in Hasbro's role as storytellers. So I guess, and that's, we could read into that statement as much as we want, but it pretty much says to us that they're really looking at that Bumblebee movie to be successful, to help them limp along right now in what's going on with Hasbro behind the scenes. In an unrelated thing, that's all really that could be mentioned here. I mean, they're like, again, they're Canada,
Well, I
USA.
wouldn't. I wouldn't say it's terribly bad because I'm looking at. They say that they're in a strong financial position and balance sheet. So they say that in cash at quarter's end, they still have $1.6 billion.
Yeah,
So I mean,
I think
understandably, to lose 112 million. I mean, that's bad, but it's not like, oh my god, man.
I think it's understandable, if anything,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
even
I'm
though
surprised it's not more. I'm
and
surprised it's not higher.
yeah, and in all honesty, I think it's number one. I think it's not terrible considering the fact that Toys R Us in the States and the UK went under. That's one
Yeah.
thing, so you can't blame them. But number two, it not being as bad really attributes to probably the power that Walmart and online, and let's say Amazon, has compared to Toys R Us, in
Mm.
that even though Toys R Us went under in the States, it didn't make a huge a dent as we thought it would because of, again, primarily because there's these other big wigs that do it, I guess, in larger numbers for them. Who knows? I think it's more so maybe because even though toys, a Transformer section is tiny in a Walmart,
Hmm.
there's still a lot more Walmarts than there are Toys R Us's in regions. You could go to a small little town in the middle of nowhere and they'll still have a Walmart, but they won't have a Toys R Us, at least
Yeah.
back then. So there's still more Transformers per Toys R Us, not per Toys R Us's, but I mean per the whole if you add up all the Walmarts as opposed to all the Toys R Us's. You know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. For
Like
sure,
it's
for
just
sure.
that. So I think ultimately in the end, because there's so much more WalMarts, because they're so much more successful than Toys R Us was, they were able to kind of pick up the load despite the fact of something else leaving, and that again leads into what I was saying before about the board games and how out of all the stuff that went down, their gaming division suffered the most, and I think it's just because board games are just not a big a deal in all those other locations, whether it be Amazon or whether it be Walmart. Where I know with Toys R Us, man, their board game section is as big, if not bigger, than the boy action figure section. Like if you took all of Star Wars, the whole Star Wars aisle, the Marvel aisle, the Ninja Turtles aisle, you added that all together, and then you take their board game section. Sometimes it's just as big. So it's pretty impressive and this is in Canada and from my perspective. So I think that that's the big hit more than anything is that they really relied on Toys R Us for the gaming side of things because that board game section is almost 100% Hasbro product. It's very I mean, some of them are independent, some of them are different stuff, but in general, it's mostly Hasbro that handles the board game stuff. Kenner, excuse me,
And that's mostly like classic stuff that you would think of. Like, they show the Monopoly Man
yeah,
there right
Monopoly.
in
Well,
their thing.
all of that stuff. Milton
All the
Bradley
Parker
was
brothers, all the, yeah, exactly.
it's
Milton
all owned by
Bradley.
Hasbro now, so it's
I
a
wonder if people still remember those names.
it's
You
hard
know
to
what I
say.
mean? A
It's hard to
Parker
say.
Brothers game,
Yeah,
by Milton Bradley. They always throw that in there.
yeah, it's hard to say. But either way, so that's one thing. Another thing that I want to mention, and this ties to it. It was another piece of news was that not too long after we started this podcast, I think it was this morning, was it,
Hmm.
or yesterday, it was announced that Fairfax, which is a multi-zillion dollar company in Canada, recently bought the entire ownership of Toys R Us in Canada. And that what that means pretty much is it 100% ensures that Toys R Us in Canada will not be having any problems. And as I read more into this, I discovered that on top of that, Fairfax Financial Holdings, which is a Toronto based company that bought them, has no intentions of changing anything the way they operate, the way they did things, because Toys R Us in Canada was actually handled quite well from their perspective, meaning like it actually did very well in terms of profits and everything. Now, the argument that I could give is Toys R Us's in Canada really aren't that different from Toys R Us's in the United States, bare of certain figures here and there. I mean,
Right.
you could say, oh well, they get NECA and we don't, or something, like.
Hmm.
But in general, Toys R Us's in Canada and Toys R Us in the United States are handled the exact same way. I think the only difference is, and this is more so because we're collectors and we see it from a different perspective than let's say Fairfax does as a business, but because they just see numbers. I think it's more so because in Canada we just don't have choices. So
Yeah.
so in our case, it's just more Toys R Us, it survives and it does very well here in Canada because it's one of the few choices that we have when it comes to toy hunting from a local retail point of view. And that's what makes them look good in the face of Fairfax. And Fairfax looks at the numbers and pretty much confirms for us Toys R Us was never struggling in Canada. And that the whole bankruptcy thing was solely an American and a United Kingdom issue because people just got their toys elsewhere. And we've said it in previous podcasts. In the States, you got more choices. It's in Canada, you don't. You got Walmart and you got Toys R Us. That's it. Everything else, if you're looking for toys, it's it's that one small little shelf in a little niche thing. When you're going to a GameStop, it's that one little toy shelf. They might have one case of Studio Series is what they have right now. If you go into GameStop right now, they have Studio Series Transformers, but it's like that one, that one case that they cracked open of one
Yeah.
of each figure. You go to Winners, whatever the roll of the dice is, they might have that one or two Rescue Bot toys that are on clearance, but that's about it. Like it's really a roll of the dice with when it comes to other places in Canada. So you only really have two places, Walmart and Toys R Us. So you lose Toys R Us, you have nothing. So that's no surprise why Toys R Us was doing so well in Canada, because it was plan B for birthday parties. It was, if you didn't go to Walmart. It was the go-to for bicycles. If you wanted to get a bike for your kid, if you wanted to pick up video games, if you wanted to get board games, it was the go-to for a lot of things. And I don't know what that means for the future of, so let's say, the Babies R Us division.
Hmm.
There's no mention of that at all in this statement, which I find interesting. Um, Again, they mention the Babies R Us thing from the United States point of view, but they never mention anything about Babies R Us from the Canadian point of view. So we'll see what happens with that. But otherwise, as it
I
stands
wonder
right
if they're
now,
treating it as one and the same.
it's possible. It's very possible. Babies R Us was created in a lot of ways to help pick up the slack for Toys R Us in some areas. In the end, it worked at first. In the end, it didn't work in the long run. But it makes me wonder if it's something they want to. Again, it's who knows? Maybe in Canada, Babies R Us does really well also. Maybe baby registries are a big deal over here. I don't know. I wouldn't know myself. Um, but yeah, this is great stuff. It shows that at least they're doing well, and that will be good news too for Hasbro going into the second quarter. At least from the Canadian side of things, they know they're covered when it comes to Canada for Jeffrey and Toys R Us.